So up next we have Tim Campbell, who's an aquatic invasive species outreach specialist with Extension, Wisconsin Sea Grant, and the DNR, and he'll be telling us about aquatic invasive animals.
Thanks, Anne. And for those of you that don't know who I am, I help coordinate aquatic invasive species outreach across all three organizations. And I spend a lot more of my time talking to people about washing boats or not letting pets go. Not so much on what to look out for, but I'm going to talk to you about that today because there are a few things that have very limited distributions here in Wisconsin, and I think there are things that the Wisconsin First Detector Network might be able to help us identify. So if we're talking, aquatic plant early detection versus fish and invert early detection, relatively speaking, if we look at plants, aquatic plants are relatively stationary. Of course, unless if you're talking about things like water lettuce or water hyacinth that have little leaves that act like sails and might blow them across the lake. These things aren't moving around. They're relatively easy to detect and remove relative to fish and inverts, and there's better developed control technologies. But when we start looking at invasive fish and invasive invertebrates, um, invasive fish are often hard to detect using traditional sampling techniques, and I'll talk about a couple that we are concerned with here in Wisconsin. And eradication efforts aren't always feasible because they can move around pretty easily. It's really hard to, uh, you know, it's really hard to treat an entire lake for an invasive fish, selectively. And then, the technology, even if it does exist, doesn't really exist. That's why we don't often undertake efforts to control exotic fish, unless if you're rote noning an entire system, which takes out all of the fish. So that's not usually something we want to do. So a couple of the things I'd like to talk to you guys today, just really briefly about, are round gobies, 4 species of Asian carp, spiny waterfleas, and New Zealand mud snails. So first up is the round goby. It's a native of the Ponto-Caspian region, so the same place that many of our invasive species that came over in ballast water came from. It's a benthic invertivore, so it's eating macroinvertebrates, and on the benthos, or the bottom of the lakes and rivers. It also eats a lot of fish eggs. It's a very effective fish egg predator, which we'll talk a little bit more about impacts here in a second. Relative to our native fishes, they have multiple reproduction events in a single year, so that's not something our native fish are really doing. They're having maybe one reproduction event, where round gobies could have multiples in a single year. They contribute to bioaccumulation of toxins up the food chain, and they have been implicated in the decline of native benthic fishes. And if they were to get outside of the Great Lakes and especially into the upper Mississippi River system, we're really concerned with impacts to native mussels because not only are gobies able to eat mussels, but since they're out competing and impacting these native benthic fishes, a lot of native mussels have very specific fish hosts. So if round gobies are out competing those native hosts, we don't think that the goby would also serve as a host for these mussels. They can eat zebra mussels and quagga mussels, which is great because it's in the Great Lakes, unlocking a lot of that energy into different parts of the food web. But it's really shifted the energy of the Great Lakes from offshore to nearshore, and really with a much bigger focus on benthic fishes, or fish that can utilize those energy resources. And there's just a handful of fish have started to learn how to utilize this energy source. So again, that's great. But there's also, like I said, impacts to the native fishes. And in terms of invasion pathways, ballast water was the primary invasion pathway, with bait bucket release being the secondary invasion pathway. And if you're looking to identify a round goby, there's a few native lookalikes, but a really obvious characteristic is this fused pelvic fin here. There's no other fish in North America that has this. So if you have one pelvic fin instead of two, you probably have a round goby. Another key characteristic is that dot right there on the dorsal fin. That's pretty obvious on most fish. And then it has relatively bulging eyes, or frog-like eyes. And relative to some of our native fishes that look a lot alike, the mottled sculpin, it's hard to see, but here on the top picture of the round goby, there's the single fin. On the bottom picture, there's the 2 fins right there. So that's a pretty key characteristic and easy way to tell gobies and sculpin apart, because as you can tell from a top view, they look pretty similar. Another species they get confused with are darters, but darters, well, they don't have the fused pelvic fins, they don't have that dot on the dorsal fin, and they're just generally a smaller bodied fish, side to side to around goby. And then if you start to look at both sculpin and darters, they tend to be a little bit more fusiform. And if you're thinking about it, these fish are really well designed to hang out in currents of streams. Gobies not so much. They're native to larger bodies of water in Eastern Europe and Western Asia. So outside of Lake Michigan, they're in some of our tributaries up to the first barrier, but they were recently discovered just below the Neenah and Menasha dams, and so they're knocking on the door of Lake Winnebago, which really concerns us. And if you like sturgeon, it should concern you because gobies are known predators of sturgeon eggs. And so specifically, if you're familiar with this area, round gobies have been found right below, let me see, the Menasha Dam, which I think is down here, and then the Neenah Dam. And then this lock, which is the last lock before you get into the Winnebago system, has currently been closed, which has caused some navigation issues in this area. But the DNR has undertaken some really extensive trapping and fishing efforts to look for round gobies. They found a few downstream of the dam, but nothing upstream into the Lake Winnebago system yet. So why is citizen involvement important for looking for round gobies? They have no swim bladder, so it's really difficult to detect them using electrofishing, because when you electrofish most fish, they pop up to the surface. Round gobies, not so much. They have a really small home territory, and maybe 10 meters by 10 meters, so maybe your living room. And while there are some fish that'll disperse outside of that area, most of them just hang out in that small area, so you really need to be right on top of them to find them. So there's very limited number of fisheries biologists or invasive species people that can be out there looking for round gobies, but every angler has the possibility or the chance of being a goby first detector. And they often, they're really aggressive and they often bite fish hooks. They're a known nuisance on the Great Lakes for perch fishermen and walleye fishermen because they steal bait. So if you do happen to be out fishing, and especially if you're fishing on the bottom, if there's gobies present in the area that you are fishing, there's a chance you'll catch one. So being able to identify one and report one, perhaps using the Glidden app, would be really useful for us. So moving on, the spiny water flea. I'll spend a little less time probably on the impacts and identifying some of these things, but they're from the Ponto-Caspian region. They're larger than our native zooplankton and they're predatory. And in terms of identifying them, really that long spine that they have is a really key identification tool. And they're bigger, so where you might not see a lot of our native zooplankton with the native eye, you can see spiny water fleas. They produce sexually and asexually, so when they're producing asexually, they're prone to just rapid population expansions, and that's normally when people see them the most. And they tend to like cooler water temperatures and can't survive at really high water temperatures. And if we look at Lake Mendota, which has had some of the highest concentrations of spiny water fleas recorded anywhere in the world, pre-invasion, they had, invasion caused there to be a decrease in water clarity, which has been very impactful in the Madison chain. And we can see that after spiny water fleas invaded, there were much fewer native algae grazers in the plankton community, and that's causing some of those impacts. And some work from the Center for Limnology suggests that it would cost millions of dollars each year to get that water quality back using other methods of upstream nutrient reduction techniques. So just on this one lake, spiny water fleas could be having an impact of millions of dollars. Luckily, spiny water fleas are pretty limited throughout Wisconsin. The Madison chain and in northern Wisconsin also has a few lakes with spiny water flea, and fishermen are often some of the first people to find them. They might be trolling or casting, and you'll see this big blob of spiny water fleas on your line. It's pretty indicative of an invasion. But that's what one looks like up close. So if you're out fishing, trolling, and you see a big blob of plankton with long spines on it, probably have some spiny water fleas, and we'd appreciate that report. In terms of preventing the spread of spiny water fleas, the standard Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers guidance of inspect, remove, drain, never move definitely works. But we also think that anchors might be really key in spreading spiny water fleas because they have this really resilient resting egg. And so be sure to clean your anchors of all sediment because those might contain spiny water flea eggs. And if you want to learn more about the spiny water flea, I am urging you to go to stopthespiny.com where you'll have an awesome video where you can learn about spiny water fleas. So New Zealand mud snails, moving on. Really small snail, much different systems than round gobies or spiny water fleas. While they're in the Great Lakes and in some of our harbors, we're really more concerned about these in a lot of our rivers and streams in Wisconsin. And wading anglers are likely vectors, and they're mostly consuming detritus and algae. They're grazers in the streams. And fun fact, they can survive passage through a fish. So if something were to eat them, a lot of times they're not digested and they can be passed through a fish. So they're not really great food for anything. And so in terms of where spiny water fleas are in the Great Lakes region, they're actually the only known inland population of spiny water fleas in the Great Lakes region is in Wisconsin, in Black Earth Creek, and then very recently discovered in Badger Milk Creek, which is very close to Black Earth Creek in southwest Wisconsin. So yay, Wisconsin. We have done a lot of work looking for New Zealand mud snails throughout Wisconsin and some of our neighboring states in Iowa and Illinois. And through some eDNA work, we didn't find any other eDNA positive samples in outside of Black Earth Creek in Wisconsin, Iowa, or Illinois. So that gives us some confidence that they're not widespread in the region. And in terms of a response, the River Alliance and partners have been working to put up signs and water cleaning stations at popular access points. And in response to the recent Badger Mill discovery, there's more outreach efforts going on right now. So if you like to hang out in streams in Wisconsin, where might you find New Zealand mud snails? They prefer macrophytes in littoral zones or slow streams with organic substrates. They seem to thrive in disturbed watersheds like many of our invasive species, and they can tolerate siltation and high flow conditions. And so if you happen to be out in a stream and see huge populations of this tiny snail, you should probably report that because that could be New Zealand mud snails because they are known to be in very high densities. I think the highest ever recorded is 500,000 per square meter. Something else you can do to help prevent the spread is maybe use hard-soled waders when possible if things aren't too slick out there because those dry out better, which will help desiccate New Zealand mud snails if they happen to be on your gear. So quickly, in the last 5 minutes, I just want to cover some of our Asian carp species that are knocking on the door of some of our waters in Wisconsin. So when we refer to Asian carp, we're not just referring to one fish. We're talking about 4 species of fish: the black carp, the grass carp, the silver carp, and the bighead carp. We're all probably more familiar with the silver and bighead carp. The silver carp are the jumpers and the YouTube stars, but the bighead carp actually can be a lot bigger, over 100 pounds. And these are both filter feeders. The silver carp specialize in phytoplankton, where the bighead carp specialize more in zooplankton and suspended macroinvertebrates, and they both lack a true stomach, which requires them to feed constantly. So fun fact if you ever need to win trivia. But you can help identify silver and bighead carp. They have that really ugly looking downward pointing eye, which seems to be a pretty key characteristic for people. They have a keel on the back part of the fish that not a lot of our native species have. And you can also look at the gill rakers, which maybe is a little bit advanced, but the silver carp have a spongy gill raker that helps them get that really fine material, where the bighead carp have more of a comb gill raker that helps them get some of the slightly larger material. And then there's also grass carp and black carp. Grass carp eat aquatic plants and submerged terrestrial vegetation. They're often used for plant control, or have been in the past, before we decided that they were very invasive. And then black carp are molluscivores, and so they're eating snails and mussels. And so I guess the big concern for black carp is that they have a relatively limited distribution, but again, in the upper Midwest, or sorry, in the upper Mississippi River Basin, we have a high diversity of native mussels. And so if they were to make their way up there, that could be really impactful to those already threatened species. So silver carp have worked their way, or have been captured mostly by commercial fishermen in the Mississippi River. The same with, okay, I don't. Big head carp, generally the same distribution. They've also worked their way up over into the Missouri River as well. Thing to note here that big head carp have actually been captured below the Prairie du Sac Dam. So they have worked their way into the Wisconsin River, but there's no evidence of reproduction. And they've all been large individuals, and they're known to disperse quite long distances. Grass carp are a little bit more widespread in Wisconsin. We think that this might be because they've often been stocked on like golf courses, in places where having really clean-looking bodies of water are important. And so if you're in a city pond or something like that, there is a chance that maybe at some point in time grass carp were stocked there. And then lastly, black carp haven't really been found in the upper Mississippi River at all. They're kind of stalled here in Missouri and Illinois. And we think that it might be temperature limiting, but we're not sure yet. But they've currently been expanding and becoming much more abundant in this stretch. So be on the lookout in the Mississippi River for black carp. Where you'll find them, you might find them in the Mississippi River or the Wisconsin River. Again, golf courses. One potential avenue of spread has been fish stocking because they have been introduced into aquaculture ponds to help either keep vegetation low or filter nutrients, and sometimes they can be contaminated there. And then if you're live harvesting bait, which you shouldn't be in VHS positive waters, small juvenile Asian carp look exactly like a whole bunch of native species of bait, and they could be really difficult to tell apart. So that could also be a vector for Asian carp. So with that, I think I utilized my 16 minutes of time. So if you're really interested in some AIS stuff, check out Wisconsin AIS on Twitter and follow the Wisconsin Lakes blog.